The fluorescent lights in Patterson and Associates hummed their usual tune at 11:47 p.m., casting that familiar sterile glow across empty cubicles and abandoned coffee cups. I pushed my cleaning cart down the marble hallway, wheels squeaking against the polished floor in a rhythm that had become second nature after 8 months on the night shift. The building felt like a ghost ship. All the energy and urgency of the business day evaporated into silence, leaving behind only the distant hum of servers and the occasional click of the heating system adjusting itself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jake Morrison, and at 26, I'd never imagined I'd be mopping floors in a corporate tower in downtown Denver. 2 years of computer science at Colorado State before my dad's construction business went under, taking our family savings and my tuition fund with it. Sometimes life throws you a curveball that lands you somewhere completely unexpected, but the night shift at Patterson and Associates paid better than most entry-level positions, and it gave me time during the day to work on coding projects that might eventually lead somewhere better. Tonight felt different though. Usually the executive floor was my last stop. A quick vacuum of the reception area, empty the trash bins, and head home. But Marcus Chun, the building supervisor, had pulled me aside during the shift change with a special assignment. "Jake, we need you to handle Ms. Patterson's office tonight," he'd said, checking his clipboard with unusual care. "She's got some important clients flying in from Tokyo tomorrow morning, and apparently her regular cleaning service missed some details last week. She specifically requested a thorough job, Victoria Patterson." Even saying her name felt like stepping into deeper water. She was the founding partner of the law firm, a woman whose reputation preceded her into every room she entered. 50 years old, Harvard Law graduate, and according to office gossip, she'd built this practice from nothing into one of the most respected corporate law firms in the Rocky Mountain region. I'd seen her maybe a dozen times during shift changes, always impeccably dressed, always carrying herself with the kind of confidence that made the air around her feel charged with electricity. The elevator chimed softly as I reached the 42nd floor. Patterson and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of the building, and Ms. Patterson's corner office commanded a view that stretched from the mountains to the eastern plains. I'd only glimpsed it through the glass walls during previous cleaning rounds, but tonight I'd actually be inside that space where million-dollar deals were negotiated and corporate futures decided. Her office door stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the darkened hallway. I knocked gently before entering, a habit my mother had drilled into me since childhood. Always announce yourself, even when you think no one's listening. "Come in," came a voice from inside, smooth and professional, but with an undertone that made me pause. I pushed the door open and stepped into what felt like entering a different world entirely. The office was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows, wrapped around 2 walls, offering a panoramic view of Denver's skyline twinkling like scattered diamonds. Built-in bookshelves lined the interior walls, filled with leather-bound legal volumes and what appeared to be an impressive collection of contemporary fiction. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, its surface organized with the precision of someone who controlled every detail of their environment. And there, standing beside the windows with a crystal tumbler in her hand, was Victoria Patterson herself. She turned as I entered, and I felt something shift in my chest, a combination of surprise and something else I couldn't quite identify. She wasn't wearing her usual power suit. Instead, she had on a cream-colored silk blouse and dark slacks that somehow made her seem more approachable while still maintaining that aura of authority that defined her presence. Her auburn hair, usually pulled back in a severe bun, fell in soft waves past her shoulders. The light from the city below caught the amber flecks in her brown eyes as she studied me with what seemed like genuine curiosity rather than the polite indifference most executives showed the cleaning staff. "You must be Jake," she said, setting her glass down on a small side table. "Marcus mentioned you'd be handling my office tonight. I apologize for staying so late. I had some contracts to review before tomorrow's meeting, and I find I think more clearly when the building is quiet." I nodded, suddenly very aware of my Navy work uniform and the cleaning supplies hanging from my belt. "No problem at all, Miss Patterson. I can work around you, or if you prefer, I could come back later when you're finished." She smiled, and it transformed her entire face. Gone was the stern courtroom expression I'd seen in newspaper photos and glimpsed during brief hallway encounters. This smile was warm, genuine, with just a hint of something playful that made her seem years younger. "Please call me Victoria. And don't worry about working around me. I find the sound of purposeful activity rather soothing, actually. It reminds me of my grandmother's house on Sunday mornings, everyone bustling around with their own tasks, but somehow creating this sense of harmony." As I began unpacking my supplies, she moved to her desk and continued reviewing a thick stack of documents. The silence between us felt comfortable rather than awkward, punctuated only by the soft rustle of papers and the gentle clink of cleaning bottles. I started with the bookshelves, carefully dusting each volume and noting the eclectic mix: legal treatises next to Margaret Atwood novels, corporate finance texts beside collections of poetry. "You're very thorough," Victoria observed after I'd spent nearly 20 minutes on just one section of shelving. "Most people rush through, but you're actually reading the spines as you clean them." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "Sorry, I didn't mean to be slow. Some of these books just caught my attention. I haven't seen the first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird since my college literature class." She looked up from her papers, eyebrows raised with interest. "You studied literature?" "Computer science, actually. But I had to take some electives. And Professor Williams made that book come alive in ways I'd never experienced before. The way Harper Lee built tension through seemingly ordinary moments, how she revealed character through small details rather than grand speeches." Victoria leaned back in her chair, her attention now fully focused on our conversation rather than the contracts in front of her. "That's exactly what effective legal argumentation requires. Building your case through accumulation of precise details rather than dramatic flourishes. Most young lawyers want to be Atticus Finch delivering the closing argument, but they miss the hundreds of small moments that made that speech powerful." As I moved to cleaning the windows, our conversation continued to flow naturally. She asked about my coding projects, and I found myself describing the mobile app I'd been developing for small business inventory management. She listened with the same intensity I imagined she brought to client meetings, asking insightful questions that revealed she understood far more about technology than I would have expected. "The legal profession is undergoing a massive digital transformation," she explained, refilling her glass from a bottle of what looked like expensive scotch. "Firms that don't adapt are going to find themselves obsolete within a decade. I've been researching ways to streamline our document review process, but most of the existing solutions are either too expensive or too generic for specialized corporate law." By the time I reached her desk area, nearly 2 hours had passed, and our conversation had ranged from technology and literature to travel stories and family backgrounds. I learned that she'd grown up on a ranch outside Pueblo, that she'd worked her way through law school waiting tables and cleaning offices herself, and that she'd started this firm with nothing but determination and a used Honda Civic packed with law books. She'd learned that I came from a family of contractors, that I'd inherited my attention to detail from my father, who taught me that any job worth doing was worth doing right, and that my long-term goal was to eventually start my own software development company. As I prepared to tackle the final task, organizing the papers scattered across her conference table, Victoria stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the city lights. The silence stretched between us, but it felt different now, charged with an awareness that hadn't been there when I'd first entered the office. "Jake," she said finally, her voice softer than before, almost hesitant. "Before you finish up, would you mind doing me a favor?" I looked up from the papers I'd been carefully stacking. Of course. She turned to face me, and in the reflected light from the windows, her expression was unreadable. "Lock the door behind you." The words hung in the air between us, and I felt my pulse quicken. The simple request carried weight that had nothing to do with building security and everything to do with the electricity that had been building throughout our evening together. This wasn't just about cleaning an office anymore. The click of the lock echoed in the silence, but what followed wasn't what I'd anticipated. Victoria remained by the windows, her fingers tracing patterns on the glass as she watched the late-night traffic crawl through downtown Denver 42 floors below. The distance between us felt both electric and safe, like standing at the edge of a cliff with a sturdy railing. "I needed privacy for what I'm about to ask you," she said, turning to face me with a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "But not for the reasons you might think." I set down the stack of legal briefs I'd been organizing, my hands steadier than I felt. "I'm listening." She moved to her desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a tablet that looked nothing like the standard corporate devices I'd seen around the office. This one was sleek, personal, covered in a leather case that showed signs of frequent use. 3 months ago, our firm was selected to represent a tech startup in their acquisition by a Fortune 500 company. The deal is worth $200 million, but there's a problem. She unlocked the tablet and turned it toward me. Their inventory management system is a disaster. The acquiring company's due diligence team discovered discrepancies that could kill the entire deal. The screen displayed code that made my pulse quicken, not because it was complex, but because it was exactly the kind of tangled mess I'd encountered dozens of times in my personal projects. Inefficient database queries, hard-coded values that should have been variables, security vulnerabilities that would make any competent programmer wince. "The startup's original development team dissolved 6 months ago," Victoria continued, settling into the chair across from her conference table where I'd been working. "They've hired 3 different consulting firms to fix it, but each one has made it worse. The acquisition closes in 6 weeks, or everyone loses everything." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I studied the code more carefully, recognizing patterns and seeing solutions that the consulting firms had apparently missed. This isn't unfixable. It's actually a pretty elegant system underneath all the patches and workarounds. Someone just needs to approach it systematically instead of throwing random fixes at symptoms. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." Victoria's eyes lit up with something that looked like relief mixed with excitement. "I've been watching you work tonight, Jake. The way you organized my books wasn't random. You grouped them by theme, while maintaining alphabetical order within each section. The way you cleaned the windows was methodical, overlapping strokes that ensured complete coverage without leaving streaks. You have the kind of systematic thinking this project needs." The offer hung between us, unspoken but understood. I felt like Alice staring down the rabbit hole, knowing that accepting would change everything, but unable to resist the pull of possibility. "You want me to fix their system," I said, not quite a question. "I want to hire you as an independent contractor. Full consulting rate, which I assure you is significantly more than your current salary. The work would be evenings and weekends initially, so you could keep your day job if you prefer the security. But Jake, if you can solve this, it won't just save the deal. It'll prove you can handle enterprise-level projects." The next 2 weeks blurred together in a rhythm I'd never experienced before. Days began at Patterson and Associates, but instead of cleaning, I spent my shifts in Victoria's office, hunched over dual monitors she'd had to set up in the corner. The cleaning cart sat unused in the hallway closet, replaced by whiteboards covered in flowcharts and architecture diagrams. Victoria proved to be unlike any supervisor I'd ever worked with. She understood the technical challenges intuitively, asking questions that helped me clarify my own thinking. When I got stuck on a particularly complex database optimization problem, she'd suggest we take a break and walk the empty hallways, bouncing ideas off each other until the solution crystallized. "You think like a lawyer," I told her one night as we stood in the break room, watching coffee drip into the pot at 2 a.m. "You see the logical connections between seemingly unrelated pieces." "And you think like an architect," she replied, adding cream to her mug with the same precision she brought to everything else. "You understand how individual components need to work together to create something larger than the sum of its parts." Our conversations during those late-night coding sessions ranged far beyond the technical project. I learned that Victoria had been married briefly in her 30s to another lawyer who couldn't handle her ambition. She'd chosen career over children, a decision that sometimes kept her awake at night wondering about alternative paths not taken. She discovered that I'd grown up feeling caught between two worlds, my father's blue-collar pride in physical work well done, and my own fascination with abstract problems that existed only in code and theory. The night shift had been my compromise, honest work that paid the bills while I pursued something that felt more like calling than career. The breakthrough came on a Thursday night 3 weeks into the project. I'd been staring at the same function for hours, trying to optimize a search algorithm that seemed determined to resist every improvement I attempted. Victoria had been reviewing contracts at her desk, occasionally glancing over when I muttered particularly creative combinations of programming terminology and general frustration. "Explain it to me," she said suddenly, rolling her chair over to my workspace. "Pretend I'm the jury, and you need to make the case for why this particular piece of code is causing problems." I walked her through the logic, using her legal analogies to describe how the system was essentially cross-examining the same witness multiple times instead of organizing testimony efficiently. As I talked, the solution became obvious, so obvious I couldn't believe I'd missed it for 3 hours. "You're brilliant," I said, implementing the fix with fingers that flew across the keyboard. The system was performing redundant checks because the original developer was paranoid about data integrity, but they were asking the same question in different ways instead of asking better questions. Victoria finished, understanding the principle even if the technical details remained opaque. The performance improvement was dramatic. Functions that had taken 30 seconds now completed in under 2. The startup's CEO, Marcus Webb, called Victoria the next morning with test results that bordered on euphoric. "We ran the new system against our entire database last night," his voice crackled through the speakerphone in Victoria's office. "Jake's optimization reduced our processing time by 87%. The acquiring company's technical team is calling it a miracle." After the call ended, Victoria leaned back in her chair and studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You've just saved a $200 million deal. Jake, the startup is offering you a permanent position as their lead developer, and the acquiring company wants to discuss bringing you on as a consultant for their other properties." Success felt surreal. 3 weeks ago, I'd been mopping floors and emptying trash bins. Now I had job offers that would quintuple my salary and launch the career I'd only dreamed about during those long nights of coding personal projects that no one else would ever see. "There's something else," Victoria said, her voice taking on a tone I'd learned to recognize as her courtroom voice, the one she used when delivering news that would change everything. "Marcus Webb invited us to dinner Saturday night. He wants to celebrate the deal closure and discuss future collaboration opportunities. He specifically requested that both of us attend." The word "us" hung in the air, carrying implications that extended far beyond professional partnership. Over the past 3 weeks, our late-night work sessions had evolved into something that felt like collaboration between equals rather than boss and employee. We'd shared takeout Chinese food over code reviews, debated everything from artificial intelligence ethics to the best hiking trails in the Rockies, and discovered a rhythm of working together that felt effortless. Both of us, I repeated, testing how the words felt. I told him we'd need to discuss it first, Victoria said, but her eyes held a question that had nothing to do with business scheduling. Jake, if we go to this dinner together, people are going to draw conclusions about our relationship that may not be entirely professional. The careful phrasing was pure lawyer presenting the facts, while leaving space for the other party to reach their own verdict. But underneath the professional language, I heard something more personal, more vulnerable. What kind of conclusions? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. The kind that could complicate both our careers if we're not prepared to handle them. Outside the windows, Denver was waking up. The eastern sky showed the first hints of dawn, and early commuters were beginning to fill the streets below. In a few hours, the building would fill with lawyers and paralegals and administrative staff, transforming our quiet workspace back into the bustling heart of a major law firm. But right now, in this moment suspended between night and day, between professional and personal, Victoria and I sat facing a decision that would determine whether our partnership remained a brilliant but temporary collaboration, or evolved into something neither of us had planned, but both of us could feel building. With each shared conversation, each moment of mutual understanding, each solution we discovered together. Saturday night, I said finally. What time should I pick you up? Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Denver feel electric. I stood outside Victoria's Cherry Creek townhouse at exactly 7 o'clock, wearing the only suit I owned, a navy blue number I'd bought for college. Job interviews that still fit reasonably well, despite being 3 years out of style. The address she'd given me led to a row of elegant brick buildings that probably cost more than I'd earned in the past 2 years combined. Victoria answered the door in a black cocktail dress that transformed her from the professional powerhouse I knew into something that made my breath catch. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and she wore simple pearl earrings that caught the porch light as she moved. "You clean up well, Morrison," she said with a smile that held just enough teasing to ease my nerves. "You look incredible," I replied, then immediately worried I'd crossed some invisible professional line. But she simply locked the door behind her and slipped her arm through mine as we walked toward my 10-year-old Honda Civic parked at the curb. "I hope Marcus appreciates fine transportation," she said, eyeing my car with amused affection rather than judgment. The Broker restaurant occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that made Victoria's office seem modest by comparison. Marcus Webb had reserved a private dining room where we were joined by his wife Elena, the acquiring company's CTO Sandra Chun, and her husband David, a federal judge whose presence immediately elevated the evenings. Stakes beyond simple business celebration. "To the miracle worker," Marcus announced, raising his glass of champagne as soon as we were seated. "Jake, I've been in tech for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone reverse engineer and optimize code that efficiently. You didn't just save our deal, you've given us a platform that'll scale for the next decade." The praise felt surreal, but what struck me more was how naturally Victoria fielded the follow-up questions about our collaboration. She described our working relationship with the same precision she brought to legal arguments, highlighting my technical innovations while positioning herself as the strategic advisor who'd recognize the solution's potential. Victoria has this remarkable ability to see connections that aren't obvious to the rest of us, I found myself saying when Sandra asked about our development process. She thinks 3 moves ahead, like a chess player who's already planning the endgame while I'm still figuring out the opening. Elena Webb, a marketing executive with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, leaned forward with interest. "How did you two discover you worked so well together? It's not often you see this kind of synergy between technical and legal minds." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her wine glass, and I realized we were being evaluated as more than just professional partners. The successful people at this table hadn't reached their positions without developing finely tuned ability to read relationships and motivations. Sometimes the best partnerships develop organically, Victoria said carefully. Jake was contracted to solve a specific technical problem, but we discovered our approaches complemented each other in unexpected ways. Organic development, Judge Shun repeated, his tone neutral, but his eyes missing nothing. In my experience, the most effective professional relationships require clear boundaries to maintain their effectiveness. The comment carried weight beyond its surface meaning. A federal judge doesn't make casual observations about professional boundaries without reason, and I felt the temperature in the room shift subtly as everyone processed the implication. Sandra Shun, perhaps sensing the tension, redirected the conversation toward technical details about the system architecture. But the damage was done. We'd been noticed, evaluated, and found to be walking a line. That made people with serious careers nervous. The evening continued with excellent food and stimulating conversation about everything from artificial intelligence, regulation to the future of corporate law. But underneath the professional discussion, I was acutely aware of being studied. Elena asked pointed questions about my background and career plans. Sandra inquired about my long-term goals with barely concealed assessment of whether I was serious enough to warrant Victoria's professional attention. Even Marcus, despite his earlier praise, seemed to be recalibrating his opinion of our partnership. By the time we left the restaurant, I felt like I'd been through a diplomatic negotiation rather than a celebration dinner. Victoria remained poised throughout the evening, but I could sense the careful calculation behind her responses, the way she balanced warmth with professional distance. "Well," she said as I started the Honda's engine, "that was illuminating." "They think we're sleeping together," I said bluntly. Pulling into downtown traffic, Victoria stared out the passenger window for several blocks before responding. "They think we might be, which in their world is almost as problematic. People at that level don't take risks with their reputations unless the potential reward justifies the exposure." Monday morning brought the first real consequences of Saturday's dinner. I arrived at Patterson and Associates to find Marcus Chen, the building supervisor, waiting in the lobby with an expression that suggested our conversation wouldn't be pleasant. "Jake, we need to talk," he said, leading me toward his small office near the loading docks. "I got a call this weekend from building management. Apparently, there are some concerns about your expanded responsibilities." He handed me a formal letter on Patterson and Associates letterhead. The language was carefully legal, but the message was clear. My access to the executive floors outside normal cleaning hours was being reviewed for compliance with building security protocols, effective immediately. I would need written authorization from a senior partner for any work performed outside my standard janitorial duties. "This came from Ms. Patterson's partners," Marcus explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "They're not questioning her right to hire outside consultants, but they want proper documentation of your activities in the building." The political implications were obvious. Victoria's partners had noticed our collaboration and were asserting their authority to monitor it. The letter was professionally worded, but it was essentially a shot across the bow, a warning that our working relationship was under scrutiny. That evening, I found Victoria in her office, reviewing the same letter with the focused intensity she usually reserved for complex legal briefs. Her desk was covered with partnership agreements and firm policy documents, suggesting she'd been researching the political landscape since receiving her copy. "They're not wrong to be cautious," she said without looking up. "Law firms are built on reputation and client confidence. Any hint of impropriety can damage relationships that took decades to build." "Impropriety," I repeated, tasting the word's bitter implications. We've been working at a legitimate project that saved a major client. What's improper about that? Victoria finally looked up, her expression weary in a way I'd never seen before. The impropriety isn't what we've done, Jake. It's what people think we might do, or what they think we might have already done. In the legal profession, appearance matters as much as reality. She gestured toward the documents scattered across her desk. I've been reviewing our partnership agreement. As a founding partner, I have considerable autonomy in hiring consultants and managing client relationships. But that autonomy exists within bounds that are defined by my partner's comfort level. And your partners aren't comfortable with me. My partners aren't comfortable with the appearance of a personal relationship between us, affecting your professional access to confidential client information. She corrected, but the distinction felt academic. The phone rang as we talked, displaying the caller ID for Robert Hayes, Victoria's senior partner and the firm's managing director. She answered with her professional voice, but I could hear the tension underneath. Robert, I received your memo about consultant access protocols. Yes, I understand the security concerns. No, I don't think that's necessary. We can discuss it at tomorrow's partners meeting. When she hung up, the silence stretched between us like a chasm. Outside the windows, Denver's evening traffic created streams of light against the gathering darkness, but inside the office, the atmosphere felt heavy with unspoken complications. They want to review all my consulting relationships, Victoria said finally. Not just yours. Everyone I've hired in the past year. They're calling it a routine security audit, but the timing isn't coincidental. I could resign from the project. I offered, though the words felt like swallowing glass. Find another way to complete the system optimization without involving the firm. Victoria's response came quickly, with the kind of decisive clarity that made her effective in courtroom battles. Absolutely not. You've earned this opportunity through merit, not favoritism. If we let them undermine your professional credibility, based on speculation about our personal relationship, we're setting a precedent that will follow both of us for years. So what do we do? She stood and moved to the windows, her silhouette framed against the city lights. We document everything. Every conversation, every technical decision, every hour you spend on the project. We make our professional relationship so transparent that there's no room for speculation about hidden agendas, and our personal relationship. The question hung between us, carrying weight that neither of us had been ready to address directly. Over the past month, our late-night work sessions had evolved into something that felt like partnership in the deepest sense, intellectual, emotional, and increasingly difficult to define within conventional professional boundaries. Our personal relationship, Victoria said slowly, is going to have to wait until we've proven that our professional judgment hasn't been compromised by personal feelings. The decision felt both logical and devastating. We were choosing to protect our careers by denying the connection that had made our collaboration so effective. But as I looked at Victoria standing against the windows, her reflection doubled in the glass like a woman caught between two worlds. I realized that the external pressure we were facing was only the beginning of the challenges ahead. 3 weeks of documentation had turned our collaboration into something resembling a scientific experiment. Every email was copied to Victoria's assistant. Every technical meeting was recorded, and I maintained detailed time logs that accounted for every minute spent on firm premises. The transparency was suffocating, but it was working. The startups acquisition had closed successfully, generating substantial fees for Patterson and Associates, and even Robert Hayes had grudgingly acknowledged the project's value during the partners' monthly review. But the professional success came at a personal cost that neither Victoria nor I had fully anticipated. Our conversations became carefully neutral, our interactions limited to technical necessities. The easy banter that had made our late-night work sessions feel like discovery rather than labor disappeared. replaced by the kind of polite efficiency that marked relationships between people who were trying very hard not to reveal what they really thought about each other. I was reviewing deployment schedules in the conference room adjacent to Victoria's office when I overheard her phone conversation with a potential client, a conversation that would change everything. "Mr. Nakamura, I understand your concerns about the timeline," Victoria was saying, her voice carrying the controlled urgency she used for high-stakes negotiations. "But I assure you, our technical consultant has a proven track record with enterprise-level implementations." Through the glass wall, I could see her pacing behind her desk, gesturing with the intensity that emerged when she was fighting for something important. The Nakamura Group was a Japanese conglomerate considering a major expansion into the American market, and their legal work would represent the largest single contract in Patterson and Associates history. "Yes, he's young, but his innovation saved our last client over $3 million in operational costs," Victoria continued. "I'm willing to stake my reputation on his capabilities." The words hit me like a physical blow. Victoria was putting her professional credibility on the line for me again, even after weeks of careful boundaries and documented interactions. She was fighting for opportunities I didn't even know existed, advocating for my abilities to clients who could transform my entire career trajectory. Robert Hayes appeared in the conference room doorway, his expression suggesting he'd also been listening to Victoria's call. At 62, Hayes was everything Victoria wasn't: old Denver money, Harvard connections, and the kind of entrenched conservatism that viewed innovation as a necessary evil rather than an opportunity. "Impressive promises she's making on your behalf," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "The Nakamura contract could be worth $15 million over 5 years. That's the kind of money that makes or breaks careers." I closed my laptop, recognizing that this conversation was about more than the technical project. "Ms. Patterson has confidence in the solutions we've developed together." "Ms. Patterson," Hayes repeated with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, Jake, in your professional opinion, is Victoria's judgment regarding your capabilities influenced by personal feelings?" The question was a trap wrapped in legal precision. Any answer would either impugn Victoria's professionalism or force me to deny the connection that had made our collaboration so effective. Hayes was demanding that I choose between protecting Victoria's reputation and acknowledging the truth about our relationship. "Victoria Patterson is the most professionally rigorous person I've ever worked with," I said carefully. "Her recommendations are based on documented results, not personal preferences." "Documented results," Hayes nodded. "Yes, we've all seen your detailed logs. Very thorough, very comprehensive." He paused, studying me with the calculated patience of someone who'd spent decades reading witnesses and juries. "But documentation can't capture everything, can it? The late-night conversations, the shared meals, the way you two anticipate each other's thoughts during technical discussions." Through the glass wall, I could see Victoria ending her call with Nakamura. Her expression suggested the conversation had gone well, but Hayes's presence in the conference room would undoubtedly complicate whatever progress she'd made. "What exactly are you asking me, Mr. Hayes?" "I'm asking whether you understand the position you've put this firm in," he said, his voice taking on the measured cadence of a closing argument. "Victoria is brilliant, but she's also impulsive. She takes risks that more cautious minds would avoid. Usually those risks pay off, but when they don't, the consequences affect everyone here." Victoria knocked on the conference room door and entered without waiting for permission, her eyes moving quickly between Hayes and me as she assessed the political dynamics in the room. "Robert, I wasn't expecting you this evening," she said, with the kind of careful neutrality that meant she was preparing for battle. "Just having a conversation with Jake about the Nakamura opportunity," Hayes replied smoothly. Discussing expectations and professional boundaries. Professional boundaries, Victoria repeated, and I heard the edge in her voice that opposing counsel learned to fear. In my experience, the most important professional boundary is the one between competence and mediocrity. Jake's work speaks for itself. No one's questioning Jake's technical abilities, Hayes said. We're discussing whether personal relationships might be affecting professional judgment. The room fell silent except for the distant hum of evening traffic 42 floors below. Victoria and Hayes faced each other across the conference table like opposing counsel in a trial that would determine more than just legal strategy. This was about power, professional autonomy, and the price of innovation in an institution built on tradition and careful risk management. "Robert," Victoria said finally, her voice taking on the deadly calm that preceded her most devastating courtroom moments. "Let me be absolutely clear about something. My professional judgment regarding Jake Morrison is based on results that saved our client millions of dollars and generated substantial fees for this firm. If you're suggesting that my personal feelings have compromised my ability to evaluate talent, you're questioning my fitness as a partner." "I'm suggesting," Hayes replied with equal care, "that appearances matter in our profession. The Nakamura Group is conservative, traditional, and extremely conscious of professional propriety. If they perceive any irregularity in our consultant relationships, it could jeopardize the entire engagement." "Then perhaps," Victoria said, standing and moving to the windows that overlooked downtown Denver, "we should address those perceptions directly." She turned back to face us, and I saw something in her expression that made my pulse quicken. The look of someone who just made a decision that would change everything. "Jake," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to propose, "I want you to present the Nakamura technical proposal yourself. Not as my consultant, but as an independent contractor working directly with their development team." Hayes's eyebrows rose slightly, the first crack in his composed demeanor. "Victoria, that's highly irregular. The client expects to work through established firm channels." "The client expects results," Victoria countered. "Jake has proven he can deliver those results. If we present him as an independent expert rather than a firm employee, it eliminates any question about our professional relationship while giving Nakamura direct access to the person who'll actually be implementing their systems." I felt like I was watching a chess master sacrifice her queen to achieve checkmate. Victoria was proposing to remove herself from the technical relationship entirely, giving up control over a project that could define both our careers while simultaneously positioning me for the kind of visibility that could launch my consulting practice into an entirely different league. "That's assuming Nakamura accepts the arrangement," Hayes said, "and assuming Jake is prepared to handle that level of responsibility without firm support." Victoria looked at me directly for the first time in weeks, her eyes holding the question that went far beyond professional considerations. "Jake, are you ready to take that risk?" The moment stretched between us, weighted with implications neither Hayes nor anyone else in the firm could fully understand. Victoria was offering me professional independence while risking her own standing with the partners. She was betting her reputation on my abilities while creating distance between us that might become permanent. But underneath the professional calculation, I heard something else in her question, a personal challenge that acknowledged everything we hadn't been able to say during weeks of careful documentation and professional boundaries. "Yes," I said, meeting her eyes across the conference table. "I'm ready." Hayes gathered his papers with the deliberate movements of someone who just witnessed a power play he hadn't anticipated. "I'll need to discuss this with the other partners before we can proceed." "Of course," Victoria said, but her tone suggested the discussion was a formality rather than a genuine consultation. "The Nakamura presentation is scheduled for Friday. That gives us 3 days to prepare Jake for independent contractor status." After Hayes left, Victoria and I remained in the conference room, the silence between us heavy with unspoken recognition that our professional relationship was about to transform completely. She just sacrificed her position as my advocate to give me the opportunity to succeed on my own terms. Why? I asked finally. Victoria smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it reached her eyes. Because the best partnerships know when to let go, and because I believe in you enough to risk my profession standing on your success. And us? What happens to us? She moved closer, close enough that I could see the determination mixed with vulnerability in her expression. That depends entirely on whether you can succeed without me holding your hand. The challenge was clear, and so was the promise hidden within it. Victoria was giving me the chance to prove myself as her professional equal, but the subtext was unmistakable. Our personal relationship couldn't move forward until we'd established that our professional partnership was built on mutual respect rather than dependence or favoritism. Friday, I said, accepting both the opportunity and the risk it represented. Friday, she agreed, and in that single word, I heard both a farewell and a beginning. Thursday night, less than 12 hours before the Nakamura presentation, my phone rang with the kind of urgency that makes your stomach drop before you even see the caller ID. My mother's voice crackled through the speaker, strained and barely controlled. "Jake, honey, you need to come home. Your father's in the hospital." The words hit like a physical blow. Dad, Toni Morrison, the man who'd taught me that any job worth doing was worth doing right, who'd built half the custom homes in Littleton with his own hands, had collapsed at a job site that afternoon. Massive heart attack. The paramedics had worked on him for 8 minutes before getting a pulse back. "He's stable now," Mom continued, but I could hear the fear she was trying to hide. "But Jake, the doctors say the next 24 hours are critical. They're talking about surgery, and ... Her voice broke completely. I was already pulling on clothes, grabbing keys, trying to think through the implications while my hands shook with adrenaline. "I'm on my way, Mom." "Which hospital?" "Presbyterian St. Joseph." "But honey, didn't you say you had some big presentation tomorrow? Your father would kill me if he knew I was pulling you away from..." "Mom, stop. Nothing matters more than Dad right now. The presentation can wait." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't that simple. The Nakamura Group executives had flown in from Tokyo, specifically for tomorrow's meeting. Victoria had restructured the entire engagement around my independent contractor status. $15 million in potential contracts, 3 years of career-building opportunities, and my chance to prove I belonged in the same league as the consultants who commanded 6-figure fees, all hanging on a presentation I might not be able to give. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of streetlights and emergency phone calls. I left a voicemail for Victoria explaining the situation, then called Marcus Webb to see if he could potentially cover the technical portions of the presentation. His response was immediate and devastating. "Jake, I'm in Singapore closing another deal. There's no way I can get back to Denver in time. Besides, the Nakamura team specifically wants to meet the architect behind the optimization algorithms. You're the only one who can speak to the technical innovations they're interested in licensing." By the time I reached Presbyterian St. Joseph, the cardiac IQ felt like a war zone of monitors, ventilators, and controlled chaos. Dad lay surrounded by machines that tracked every heartbeat, every breath, every sign that life was still fighting to stay in his body. At 64, he'd always seemed indestructible, the kind of man who could work 14-hour days, framing houses and still have energy to help neighbors with their weekend projects. Now he looked fragile in a way that made my chest tighten. With panic I didn't know how to process. The blockage was severe, Dr. Patricia Valdez explained, leading Mom and me to a consultation room that smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. "We've stabilized him with medication, but he needs immediate surgical intervention." The procedure is scheduled for tomorrow at 7 a.m. Success rate? I asked, falling back on technical questions when emotional ones felt too overwhelming. 85% for patients his age with similar presentations, she replied professionally. But Jake, I need you to understand, this is major surgery. Even with a successful outcome, recovery will take months. Your father will need constant care and support during that time. Mom gripped my hand with fingers that felt bird fragile. At 62, she'd spent 40 years managing the administrative side of Dad's construction business. But the prospect of navigating insurance, medical decisions, and financial planning alone was clearly terrifying her. We'll figure it out, I told her, though I had no idea how. Dad's health insurance was basic, designed for routine care rather than major cardiac events. The business had been struggling since the housing market downturn, and I knew their savings wouldn't cover extended medical expenses. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. How is your father? Call when you can. Instead of calling, I found myself walking to the hospital chapel, a small, non-sectarian space that felt designed for the kind of desperate negotiations people make with the universe when everything they love hangs in the balance. I wasn't religious, but sitting in those wooden pews, staring at abstract stained glass that caught the fluorescent lighting like trapped rainbows, I found myself trying to calculate impossible equations. If I stayed for Dad's surgery, I'd miss the Nakamura presentation. Victoria's professional standing would suffer. My independent contractor opportunity would evaporate, and 3 years of career building would collapse into a reputation for unreliability that would follow me through every subsequent business relationship. If I left for the presentation, I'd miss the most critical hours of my father's medical crisis. Mom would face the surgery alone, and if something went wrong, if Dad didn't survive, or if complications arose, I'd live with the knowledge that I'd chosen professional advancement over family when it mattered most. Around midnight, Victoria appeared in the ICU waiting room like an answer to a prayer I hadn't known how to formulate. She'd driven straight from her office, still wearing the charcoal suit she'd worn to prepare for tomorrow's meeting, but her expression held none of the professional composure I'd grown accustomed to. This was personal concern, immediate and unguarded. How is he? She asked, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair beside mine. Surgery at 7, I managed. They think he'll be okay, but ... But you need to be here, Victoria finished, understanding immediately the choice I was struggling to make. The Nakamura presentation can be rescheduled, she said firmly. Jake, I've seen the quarterly reports from your father's business. I know this medical emergency represents more than just emotional stress for your family. The statement hung between us, acknowledging financial realities I hadn't discussed with anyone. Victoria's legal practice gave her access to credit reports and financial information that revealed more about people's circumstances than they usually shared voluntarily. I can't ask you to jeopardize the firm's relationship with Nakamura because of my personal crisis, I said. Victoria's response surprised me with its immediate intensity. You're not asking. I'm deciding. Jake, 3 months ago you were cleaning offices to pay for coding courses. Your talent got you this opportunity, but talent without support is just potential energy waiting for the right conditions to convert into results. She pulled out her phone and started typing with the focused efficiency she brought to crisis. Management, I'm calling Hiroshi Nakamura directly. We're going to reschedule the presentation for next week, and I'm going to explain exactly why. Victoria, that could destroy the entire engagement. They flew here specifically for. They flew here to meet someone with the integrity to prioritize family obligations over professional convenience, she interrupted. If they can't respect that, they're not the kind of clients we want to build long-term relationships with anyway. The conversation with Nakamura took place in the hallway outside the ICU, Victoria's voice carrying the calm authority she used for the most challenging negotiations. I couldn't hear the details, but her posture suggested she was making the case. Rather than simply requesting a delay, when she returned 20 minutes later, her expression was cautiously optimistic. Hiroshi's father died of a heart attack when he was 32. He understands family obligations. The presentation is rescheduled for Tuesday, and he's offered to cover the additional travel expenses for the delay. Relief flooded through me, so completely that I felt momentarily dizzy. Victoria, I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet, she said, settling back into the waiting room chair. Now we have to make sure you're ready to deliver the best presentation of your career next Tuesday. Because Jake, after this kind of personal advocacy, failure isn't an option for either of us. At 6:30 a.m., as orderlies wheeled Dad toward the surgical suite, he gripped my hand with strength that surprised me. Don't let me being sick mess up your big break, son, he whispered. Your mom and I didn't work this hard to watch you sacrifice opportunities for us. Dad, the presentation got moved. Everything's going to be fine. His eyes, still sharp despite the presurgical medication, studied my face with the same attention he'd always brought to reading architectural blueprints. That boss of yours, she must think pretty highly of you to reschedule something that important. She's not my boss anymore, Dad. It's complicated. Dad smiled, the first genuine expression of humor I'd seen from him since arriving at the hospital. Son, the best things in life are usually complicated. The trick is figuring out which complications are worth the effort. As they wheeled him through the surgical doors, I realized that the crisis had a way of clarifying what mattered most. Professional success meant nothing without people to share it with, and Victoria's willingness to risk her own standing to support my family obligations revealed something about her character that went far beyond professional competence. The surgery took 4 hours. Victoria stayed for all of them, working on legal briefs from the uncomfortable waiting room chairs, while I paced the hallways and consumed enough hospital coffee to fuel a small generator. When Dr. Valdez finally emerged with news that the procedure had been successful, Victoria was the first person I called with the update. He's going to be fine, I told her, my voice cracking with relief. I've been holding back for 18 hours. Then we have work to do, Victoria replied, but her tone held warmth that had nothing to do with professional obligations. Because next Tuesday, you're going to show Nakamura exactly why their patience was worth it. Tuesday morning arrived, with the kind of crystalline Colorado sunshine that made downtown Denver look like a postcard advertisement for the American dream. I stood in the lobby of Patterson and Associates at 8:30 a.m., wearing a new charcoal suit that Victoria had insisted I buy for the Nakamura presentation. Feeling like an actor preparing for the performance of his lifetime. Dad was recovering well. His cardiac surgeon had declared the procedure a complete success, and he'd been moved from ICU to a regular room where he spent most of his time complaining about hospital food and trying to manage his construction crews via FaceTime calls that Mom kept limiting to 10 minutes each. The insurance situation remained complicated, but Victoria had quietly connected us with a medical billing advocate who specialized in cardiac care coverage disputes. The Nakamura group delegation had arrived the previous evening, and Victoria's assistant had confirmed that all 4 executives would attend the 10 a.m. presentation. Hiroshi Nakamura himself, along with his CTO Kenji Suzuki, CFO Yuki Tanaka, and their American legal counsel David Kim, who'd flown in from their Los Angeles office specifically for this meeting. Remember, Victoria said as we rode the elevator to the 42nd floor conference room, you're not selling them technology, you're selling them transformation. They want to understand how your innovations can position them ahead of their competitors in the American market. But even as she reviewed the strategic talking points we'd rehearsed over the weekend, I could sense something different in her demeanor. The confident energy that had carried her through crisis management during Dad's emergency seemed tempered by an undercurrent of tension I couldn't quite identify. The presentation itself went better than I dared hope. Nakamura's technical team was sophisticated enough to appreciate the elegance of the optimization algorithms I developed, while their business executives grasped the competitive advantages those improvements could provide. Kenji Suzuki asked particularly insightful questions about scalability and security protocols, and I found myself discussing technical architecture with the kind of depth and nuance that felt like intellectual collaboration rather than sales. Demonstration. Your approach to database optimization is remarkably innovative, Hiroshi Nakamura said during the break between technical and business discussions. We've consulted with firms in Tokyo, Singapore, and San Francisco, but none have proposed solutions. With this level of systematic elegance, Victoria handled the contract negotiations with her usual precision, but I noticed her deferring to my technical expertise in ways that positioned me as the primary relationship contact rather than just another consultant working through firm channels. By the time we reached discussion of implementation timelines and fee structures, it was clear that Nakamura viewed me as an independent contractor with firm affiliation rather than a firm employee with independent capabilities. The difference was subtle but crucial for my long-term career development. We'd like to proceed with a 6-month engagement initially, Yuki Tanaka announced as the formal presentation concluded, with options to extend based on milestone achievements. Jake, we'd prefer to structure this as a direct consulting relationship with you, with Patterson and Associates handling legal and administrative support. The arrangement was exactly what Victoria had engineered, professional independence for and me while maintaining firm involvement for complex legal and regulatory issues. But as handshakes were exchanged and business cards distributed, I caught something in Victoria's expression that suggested the victory felt more complicated than celebratory. After the Nakamura delegation left for their flight back to Los Angeles, Victoria and I found ourselves alone in the conference room, surrounded by the detritus of successful negotiations, empty coffee cups, marked-up contract drafts, and presentation materials that had just generated a consulting engagement worth more money than I'd ever imagined earning. "Congratulations," Victoria said, but her tone carried weight that had nothing to do with professional accomplishment. "You've just established yourself as a legitimate player in enterprise consulting. The Nakamura contract alone will give you credibility with Fortune 500 companies across multiple industries." "We did this together," I replied. "Your strategic guidance, your willingness to restructure the engagement, your support during Dad's crisis, none of this would have happened without your advocacy." Victoria moved to the windows that had become her default position during difficult conversations, gazing out at the city where both our careers were about to diverge in directions neither of us had planned 3 months ago. "Jake, there's something we need to discuss," she said, her voice taking on the careful modulation she used for conversations that required precise emotional navigation. "Robert Hayes called this morning before the Nakamura meeting. The partners have been reviewing my consulting relationships, and they've reached some conclusions about my professional judgment." The words hit like ice water in my veins. "What kind of conclusions?" "They believe my advocacy for you has been excessive, that my willingness to reschedule a major client presentation for your personal emergency demonstrates poor boundary management between professional and personal considerations." I felt anger rising in my chest, the kind of protective fury that emerges when someone you care about faces unfair consequences for defending you. "That's ridiculous. You saved the Nakamura engagement by showing them we have integrity. Any reasonable analysis would conclude that a founding partner shouldn't risk firm relationships for individual consultants, regardless of their capabilities," Victoria interrupted, but her tone held no accusation, only weary acceptance of political reality she'd been navigating for 15 years. "What are they proposing?" Victoria turned back to face me, and I saw resignation mixed with determination in her expression. They want me to step back from direct involvement in consultant relationships. No more project management, no more client advocacy, no more late night strategy sessions that blur the lines between professional mentorship and personal investment. The implications crystallized immediately. Victoria was being forced to choose between her position as founding partner and her ability to continue working with me directly. The partners weren't questioning her legal expertise or business development capabilities. They were demanding that she sacrifice our professional partnership to maintain their confidence in her judgment. That's not just about consulting relationships, I said, understanding the deeper message the partners were sending. They're telling you to choose between your career and your personal feelings. They're telling me to maintain the kind of professional boundaries that protect both the firm's reputation and my own standing within the partnership. Victoria corrected, but I could hear the strain of defending a position she didn't entirely believe. We stood in silence for several minutes, the weight of unspoken recognition settling between us like snow accumulating on a windshield until visibility becomes impossible. Our professional partnership had given both of us opportunities we couldn't have achieved independently, but it had also created complications that threatened the careers we'd worked years to build. So what happens now? I asked finally. Victoria's response came with the kind of measured clarity that made her effective in the most complex legal negotiations. Now you take the Nakamura contract and build the consulting practice you've always wanted. You have the technical expertise, the client relationships, and the credibility to succeed independently. You don't need Patterson and Associates anymore. And you? I continue practicing law with one of the most respected firms in Colorado, representing clients who need sophisticated legal counsel for complex corporate transactions, which is what I've been doing for 15 years. The logical separation made perfect sense from a career management perspective. I would transition to independent consulting while maintaining informal professional contact through occasional referrals and industry networking. Victoria would return to focusing on legal work without the political complications created by our collaboration. Both of us would protect the professional standing we'd spent years developing. But logic didn't address the emotional reality that our partnership had become something neither of us wanted to abandon for the sake of other people's comfort with professional boundaries. Victoria, I said, moving closer to where she stood by the windows, what do you want? Not what's politically smart, not what protects your partnership status. What do you actually want? Her response came immediately, with the kind of honesty that strips away professional calculation and reveals the person underneath the career. I want to keep working with you. I want to build something together that's bigger than what either of us could accomplish alone. I want to stop pretending that our professional partnership doesn't include personal feelings that make everything we do together more meaningful. But I also want to keep the career I've spent 25 years building. I want to maintain the respect of colleagues who've supported my professional development since law school. And I want to prove that my judgment isn't compromised by personal attachments that interfere with my ability to make objective business decisions. The contradiction was impossible to resolve through negotiation or compromise. Victoria was being forced to choose between two aspects of her life that had become equally important to her professional identity and personal fulfillment. The partners want an answer by Friday, she continued. Either I agree to step back, involvement in consultant relationships, or they'll initiate a review of my partnership status that could result in forced retirement from the firm. Forced retirement was law firm terminology for professional exile, losing not just income and status, but also access to the professional network that took decades to develop. At 50, Victoria would find rebuilding her career difficult, even with her impressive track record and client relationships. There has to be another option, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew I was grasping for solutions that didn't exist. What if we could prove that our professional relationship actually enhances your effectiveness rather than compromising it? Victoria smiled, but it held sadness rather than hope. Jake, the issue isn't our effectiveness. The issue is appearances. In the legal profession, the appearance of impropriety can be as damaging as actual impropriety. My partners aren't questioning my competence. They're protecting the firm's reputation from gossip and speculation. The phone rang, displaying Robert Hayes' extension. Victoria answered with her professional voice, but I could see the tension in her shoulders as she listened to whatever message he was delivering. "I understand," she said finally. "Yes, I'll have a decision by Friday afternoon." When she hung up, the silence in the conference room felt heavy with finality. "The partners have scheduled a meeting for Friday at 4 p.m., Victoria said. "They want my commitment to new consulting protocols, or they'll begin the partnership review process Monday morning." I felt like I was watching someone I cared about face an impossible choice between professional survival and personal integrity. Victoria had spent decades building her legal practice, but she'd also discovered that mentoring me had reawakened professional passion she'd forgotten she possessed. What if I withdrew from all firm-related engagements? I offered complete separation, no more consulting relationships that could be perceived as conflicts of interest. "That doesn't solve the fundamental problem," Victoria replied. "The partners aren't just concerned about current arrangements. They're concerned about my judgment going forward. They want assurance that I won't repeat the pattern of excessive advocacy for individual consultants." "Excessive advocacy," I repeated, tasting the bitter implications of the phrase. "Excessive advocacy," Victoria confirmed, "which is how they're characterizing my willingness to reschedule the Nakamura presentation for your father's medical emergency." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Victoria was facing professional consequences not just for our working relationship, but specifically for showing basic human compassion during a family crisis. The partners were demanding that she choose between professional advancement and personal values that included supporting people she cared about during difficult times. "Victoria, I'm not going to let you sacrifice your career because you were decent enough to prioritize human needs over corporate scheduling." "You're not letting me do anything," she replied with the same firm authority she'd used during the Nakamura negotiations. "I'm making choices based on my own values and priorities. And right now, I need to decide whether those values are compatible with continuing as a founding partner at Patterson and Associates." The weight of her decision settled over us like evening shadows creeping across the conference room. Outside the windows, Denver's business district hummed with the activity of people building careers, negotiating deals, and making choices that would define their professional futures. But inside the room where we discovered that the best partnerships sometimes require impossible sacrifices, Victoria and I faced the recognition that loving someone sometimes means choosing what's best for them rather than what feels best for us. Friday afternoon arrived with the kind of heavy November clouds that made downtown Denver feel like it was wrapped in gray wool. I sat in the lobby of Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital, watching Dad work through physical therapy exercises with the determined concentration he'd always brought to construction projects that required precision and patience. 3 weeks post-surgery, his color had returned to normal, and his cardiac rehabilitation was progressing ahead of schedule. "The therapist says I might be cleared for light work by January," Dad said, setting down the resistance bands with satisfaction. "Not full construction, but maybe project management, estimating, client consultations." Mom beamed from her chair beside his bed, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her since the night of his heart attack. The medical billing advocate Victoria had recommended had successfully negotiated with insurance companies, reducing their out-of-pocket expenses from potentially bankrupting to merely financially challenging. "Speaking of work," Dad continued, studying me with the sharp attention that had always made him an effective contractor. "You've been checking your phone every 5 minutes for the past hour. Something important is happening today?" I glanced at the time, 3:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, Victoria would walk into the Patterson and Associates conference room to deliver her decision to the partners. Either she would agree to step-back involvement in consulting relationships, effectively ending our professional partnership while preserving her legal career, or she would risk everything she'd built over 25 years for the principle that personal integrity shouldn't be sacrificed for political convenience. "Yeah, Dad, something important. The kind of important that affects your future, or the kind that affects your heart?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. Dad had always been perceptive about emotional undercurrents, but he rarely addressed them so explicitly. "Both," I admitted. Dad nodded as if my answer confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Son, in 40 years of construction, I've learned that the strongest foundations require the deepest excavation. Sometimes you have to tear down what exists before you can build something that'll last." At exactly 4 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Meeting started. We'll call when finished." The next 90 minutes felt like watching the cardiac monitor during surgery, each minute stretching into eternity while I waited for news that would determine whether the patient survived or flatlined. Dad dozed intermittently, Mom worked on crossword puzzles, and I alternated between pacing the hallway and staring out windows that offered no distraction from the anxiety gnawing at my chest. At 5:31 p.m., Victoria's call finally came through. "It's done," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of exhaustion and something that might have been relief. "I need to see you. Can you meet me at the office?" "Victoria, what happened? What did you decide? Just come, please." The drive from the hospital to downtown Denver passed in a blur of early evening traffic and construction detours that seemed designed to test my patience when I had none left to spare. I found Victoria in her office, standing by the windows in the gathering dusk, still wearing the navy suit she'd chosen for the partners' meeting, but looking somehow different, lighter, as if a weight she'd been carrying for weeks had finally been lifted. "I resigned," she said without turning around. "Effective December 31st. The partners accepted my resignation and agreed to waive the standard 6-month transition period in exchange for my commitment to transfer my active cases to other firm attorneys." The words hit like a physical blow. "Victoria, no. You didn't have to. I didn't have to," she agreed, finally turning to face me. "I chose to. There's a difference." She moved to her desk and picked up a manila folder that looked like it contained legal documents. "Jake, I've been practicing law for 25 years. I've built a successful career, established a respected firm, and accumulated enough savings to support myself comfortably for the rest of my life. But in all those years, I've never felt the kind of professional excitement I discovered working with you. Professional excitement isn't worth sacrificing everything you've built." Victoria smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it reached her eyes completely. "I'm not sacrificing everything I've built. I'm using everything I've built as the foundation for something new." She opened the folder and spread several documents across her desk: articles of incorporation, business licenses, and legal filings that looked fresh from the printer. "Morrison Patterson Consulting Solutions," she said, pointing to the business name prominently displayed on the incorporation papers. "Specialized technical consulting with integrated legal support for complex corporate implementations." I stared at the documents, trying to process what she was proposing. "You want to start a consulting firm? Together?" "I want to build something that combines your technical innovations with my legal expertise and business development capabilities. We've proven we work effectively together. Jake, the Nakamura contract demonstrates we can deliver results that neither of us could achieve independently." The scope of what she was suggesting began to crystallize. You're talking about leaving law to become a business consultant. I'm talking about expanding law to include technical consulting as an integrated service offering. Most corporate legal work involves technology implementations that require both legal compliance and technical optimization. We could provide both services through a single engagement instead of forcing clients to coordinate between separate firms. She pulled out additional documents, financial projections, market analysis, and what appeared to be a comprehensive business plan that had clearly been in development for weeks. I've been researching this since the partners first raised concerns about our working relationship, Victoria continued. The market for integrated legal technical consulting is underserved, especially for mid-sized companies that need sophisticated services but can't afford the overhead of hiring separate firms for each specialized requirement. Victoria, this is insane. You're giving up partnership in an established firm to start a business that might not succeed. I'm giving up a partnership that was slowly suffocating my professional passion to build something that could redefine how technical and legal services are delivered to corporate clients, she corrected. And Jake, I'm not doing this impulsively. I've secured initial funding, identified target clients, and developed implementation strategies that leverage both our capabilities. She handed me a folder containing what appeared to be preliminary client commitments. The Nakamura Group headed the list, but it also included Marcus Webb's startup, two other technology companies I recognize from industry publications, and several names I didn't recognize, but whose letterheads suggested significant business potential. Hiroshi Nakamura was intrigued when I mentioned the possibility of integrated services, Victoria explained. His company has struggled with coordinating between their technical consultants and legal advisors. The idea of working with a single firm that can handle both aspects of complex implementations appeals to their preference for streamlined vendor relationships. You already discussed this with Nakamura? I discussed it with several potential clients. Jake, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. Companies want integrated solutions, but nobody's figured out how to deliver them effectively. We could be first to market with a service model that fundamentally changes how corporate consulting works. The magnitude of the opportunity was starting to penetrate my shock at Victoria's resignation. She wasn't just proposing that we continue working together, she was proposing that we pioneer an entirely new approach to consulting that could transform both our careers. What about startup costs? Office space, equipment, marketing, legal fees for establishing the business structure? Victoria's smile became slightly mischievous. I have savings, Jake. 25 years of partner-level income, conservative investments, and minimal personal expenses. I can fund the initial operations while we build client relationships and establish revenue streams. And if it doesn't work, if the market isn't ready for integrated consulting, or if we can't deliver the results we're promising, then I'll have spent 2 years attempting something meaningful instead of spending the next 15 years managing political dynamics that prevent me from doing my best work, Victoria replied without hesitation. Jake, failure is temporary. Regret is permanent. I walked to the windows where we'd had so many important conversations over the past 4 months. 42 floors below, Denver's evening rush hour created rivers of light flowing through the downtown grid. Somewhere in that movement were people building careers, taking risks, and making decisions that would define the next chapters of their lives. There's something else, Victoria said, her voice taking on the careful tone she used for the most important negotiations. The partnership structure I'm proposing is 50-50. Equal ownership, equal decision-making authority, equal profit sharing. This isn't me hiring you as a consultant. This is us building something together as professional equals. Victoria, you're providing all the initial funding. Most of the business development contacts and decades of experience I don't have. 50-50 doesn't reflect the actual contributions. 50/50 reflects the reality that technical innovation drives client value while legal expertise ensures sustainable implementation. Without your capabilities, this business model doesn't work. Without my capabilities, your innovations can't reach enterprise-level clients. We need each other equally. The partnership she was describing went far beyond anything I'd imagined when I'd first knocked on her office door to handle a simple cleaning assignment. She was proposing professional partnership based on mutual respect and complementary capabilities, rather than hierarchical relationships that reflected traditional corporate structures. What about our personal relationship? I asked, finally addressing the question that had been underlying all our professional discussions. We've been pretending that business partnerships and personal feelings exist in separate categories, but that's not how it actually works. Victoria moved closer, close enough that I could see the determination mixed with vulnerability in her expression. Our personal relationship is exactly why this partnership could work. We've already proven we can collaborate effectively under pressure, communicate honestly about difficult topics, and support each other during personal crises without compromising professional judgment. And if the business fails? If working together 18 hours a day destroys whatever personal connection we've built, then we'll have learned something important about ourselves and each other. But Jake, I'd rather risk failure attempting something meaningful with someone I care about than accept safety by avoiding opportunities that could change both our lives. The decision felt like standing at the edge of a cliff with a hang glider, knowing that stepping off would either result in soaring or crashing, but that staying on the cliff guaranteed missing the experience entirely. When would we start? January 2nd, Victoria replied immediately. That gives us 4 weeks to finalize business registration, secure office space, develop marketing materials, and transition my active legal cases to other Patterson and Associates attorneys. Plus time for you to complete your current commitments and prepare for the change. Office space? I've been looking at a suite in the Tabor Center. 8th floor, mountain views, enough space for technical workstations and a proper conference room for client meetings. The lease terms are favorable for startup businesses, and the location provides the kind of professional credibility corporate clients expect. The level of detail in her planning suggested this wasn't an impulsive reaction to the partner's ultimatum, but a carefully considered strategy she'd been developing for weeks. Victoria had been preparing to leave Patterson and Associates regardless of how the partnership meeting concluded. You were going to start this business even if the partners had agreed to let you continue consulting relationships? I was going to start this business because working with you showed me what professional partnership could feel like when both people bring their best capabilities to collaborative problem solving, Victoria replied. The partners' concerns just accelerated my timeline. Outside the windows, downtown Denver's office buildings were beginning to light up as the day shift transitioned to evening activities. In a few hours, cleaning crews would arrive to maintain the spaces where tomorrow's business would be conducted. 3 months ago, I'd been part of that invisible workforce that kept corporate America functioning. Now I was being offered the opportunity to build something that could influence how corporate America approached complex challenges. Morrison Patterson Consulting Solutions, I said, testing how the business name felt. Or Patterson Morrison, if you prefer alphabetical order. Victoria offered with a smile that held both professional excitement and personal affection. No, Morrison Patterson sounds right. It suggests evolution rather than hierarchy. Victoria moved to her desk and pulled out one final document, a partnership agreement that appeared to be professionally prepared, but not yet signed. I had my attorney draft this yesterday, she said. It outlines the business structure, profit-sharing arrangements, decision-making protocols, and dissolution procedures if we ever decide to go separate directions. But Jake, I want you to have your own legal counsel review it before you commit to anything. This is too important for either of us to proceed based on trust alone. You're asking me to bet my career on a business that doesn't exist yet, in a market that's never been tested, with a partner I've known for 4 months. I'm asking you to bet your career on your own capabilities, supported by someone who's already proven she's willing to risk her own career to create opportunities for you to succeed. The distinction was important. Victoria wasn't asking me to depend on her for my professional future. She was offering to build something together that would allow both of us to achieve more than either could accomplish independently. I need to talk to my parents, I said finally. Dad's recovery is going well, but they might need financial support during his transition back to work. I can't commit to a startup that might not generate income for 6 months if they're depending on me for medical expenses. Jake, Victoria said gently, I've already established a family support fund as part of the business structure. Your parents' medical expenses and living costs are covered for the first year, regardless of how quickly the consulting practice generates revenue. The gesture was so unexpected, so generous, that I felt momentarily speechless. Victoria had been planning not just for our professional partnership, but for the personal circumstances that might prevent me from taking the risk. Why? I finally managed. Because the best partnerships anticipate obstacles and address them proactively. And because I care about your family's well-being as much as I care about our professional success. At 7:30 p.m., as downtown Denver settled into its evening rhythm, Victoria and I stood in the office where we discovered that professional partnerships could evolve into something neither of us had expected, but both of us wanted to explore. Partnership agreement lay on her desk, unsigned but representing possibilities that extended far beyond business development and client relationships. I need the weekend to think about it, I said. Take whatever time you need, Victoria replied. But Jake, I want you to know that regardless of your decision about the business partnership, I don't regret resigning from Patterson and Associates. Working with you reminded me why I became interested in law in the first place, to solve complex problems that make meaningful differences in people's lives. And if I decide not to join the consulting firm, then I'll build it anyway, and I'll probably try to hire you as an independent contractor within 6 months because you're the best technical problem solver I've ever worked with. Her answer was both professionally practical and personally reassuring. Victoria was committed to the new business model regardless of my participation, which meant my decision could be based on whether the opportunity aligned with my own goals, rather than whether I was responsible for her career transition. Victoria, I said as we prepared to leave the office for the last time as Patterson and Associates colleagues, what you did today, risking everything you've built for the chance to build something better, that takes courage I'm not sure I have. You've had that courage since the night you agreed to help optimize a system that could save or destroy a $200 million deal, she replied. The only difference is scale. Monday morning, I drove to Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital to pick up Dad for his final cardiac follow-up appointment. Dr. Valdez pronounced his recovery excellent and cleared him for gradual return to normal activities, with the recommendation that he avoid heavy lifting for another month, but could resume project management responsibilities immediately if he felt ready. Best news I've heard in weeks, Dad said as we walked through the hospital parking garage. Being stuck in bed while construction season winds down has been driving me crazy. Dad, I need to talk to you and Mom about something important. A business opportunity that could change my career, but it involves some significant risks. Dad stopped walking and turned to study me with the same attention he'd always brought to evaluating whether a construction project was structurally sound. This about your boss? The one who helped us with the medical bills? Former boss. And yes, it's about Victoria. Son, in my experience, the biggest risk isn't taking chances on people who've already proven they'll support you when things get difficult. The biggest risk is passing up opportunities because you're afraid of what might go wrong. That evening, I sat at my parents' kitchen table with the partnership agreement Victoria had given me, reading through legal language that outlined the most significant professional decision I'd ever faced. Mom and Dad listened as I explained the consulting business concept, the financial projections, and the risks involved in leaving stable employment for entrepreneurial uncertainty. Sounds like she's offering you the chance to build the kind of career you've always talked about wanting, Mom said when I finished explaining the opportunity. And Jake, honey, it sounds like she's offering you something else too. What do you mean? Dad grinned, the first completely unreserved smile I'd seen from him since his heart attack. Your mother means that woman didn't risk her career just for business partnership potential. She risked it because she's in love with you. Dad, son, I've been married to your mother for 38 years. I know what it looks like when someone's willing to change their entire life for another person. The business opportunity might be legitimate, but her motivation is personal. Tuesday morning, I walked into the Tabor Center building at 9 a.m. and took the elevator to the 8th floor. Suite 847 was empty except for Victoria, who was measuring wall space for workstation placement, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt instead of her usual business attire. Checking out the space? I asked. Planning the layout, she replied, looking up from her tape measure with an expression that was carefully neutral. The lease is signed whether or not you decide to join the partnership. I pulled the signed partnership agreement from my jacket pocket and set it on the window ledge overlooking downtown Denver. Morrison Patterson Consulting Solutions, I said. When do we start? Victoria's smile could have powered the building's lighting system. We already have. Welcome to our office, partner. 6 months later, Morrison Patterson Consulting Solutions occupied 3 suites in the Tabor Center, employed 12 people, and maintained a client waiting list that stretched through the following year. The integrated legal technical consulting model had proven even more successful than Victoria's initial projections, with companies discovering that coordinated services reduced implementation timelines by an average of 40% while improving regulatory compliance outcomes. The Nakamura Group had become our largest client, with Hiroshi Nakamura serving as an unofficial reference for other Japanese companies considering American market expansion. Marcus Webb's startup had been acquired by a Fortune 100 company, specifically because our optimization work had made their systems scalable for enterprise-level operations. And Patterson and Associates had quietly begun referring clients to us for technical consulting needs that exceeded their internal capabilities. But the business success, significant as it was, felt secondary to the personal partnership Victoria and I had discovered was possible when 2 people decided to build something together based on mutual respect, complementary capabilities, and the willingness to risk everything for the chance to create something meaningful. You know, Victoria said one evening as we reviewed client proposals in our conference room overlooking the mountains, I never thanked you for cleaning my office that night. You thanked me by changing my entire life, I replied. No, she said, reaching across the table to take my hand. You changed both our lives by being brave enough to lock the door when I asked you to. Outside the windows, Denver stretched toward the Rocky Mountains, full of people building careers, taking risks, and discovering that sometimes the most important opportunities begin with the simplest request for help. We'd learned that the best partnerships require both professional competence and personal courage, the willingness to trust someone else with your dreams while supporting them in pursuing their own. Morrison Patterson Consulting Solutions was successful because we'd figured out how to combine technical innovation with legal expertise. But our personal partnership was successful because we'd figured out how to combine ambition with affection, professional growth with personal intimacy, and the courage to risk everything for the chance to build something together that neither of us could have achieved alone. That sometimes the most transformative opportunities begin with cleaning an office at midnight. Sometimes they begin with someone asking you to lock the door behind you. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, they begin with meeting someone who's willing to change their entire life for the chance to build something meaningful with you. Up. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.